All right, here we are back with birding part 2. Now you are excited to bring more of our feathered friends to your backyard. In part 1, we talked about all the ways that you can plant and landscape your yard to attract more of those birds to your yard and to feed them throughout the season. Now here in part 2, we're going to talk about bird feeders. Now in theory, just like in part 1, Mother Nature has provided plenty of ways to feed all of her species. But due to overdevelopment and due to climate change, food sources have become scarce for many species, including our feathered friends. So it is good, and that is one reason that you want to provide food and have a bird feeder out during the winter. The other reason that you would want to do that is simple: connection to nature. Especially in winter, we love to look out and see colorful birds flitting around against the snow, feeding on the food that we provide for them. So then we have this connection because we are feeding, they are coming, and we get to watch them for free. So right here in this series, we are going to talk about bird food, bird feeders, and how best to feed our friends throughout the winter. So let's start with feeders. So there are 1,000 feeders out there on the market, and each one promotes itself in its own way, and each one is supposed to be the best. I'm going to talk to you today about basically the 5 core feeders that you want to think about, the pros and cons of each one of them, and what you consider best for your backyard depending on who you want to attract. The number one nemesis of any bird enthusiast is the squirrel. We are investing in bird seed, we are putting it out there to attract all of our wonderful friends to our yard, and then the squirrels come along and they eat the majority of our seed. So there is no such thing as squirrel-proof. But we're going to start with one right here. One of the best cylinder feeders that you can choose, which is good for many different species of birds. You want to find one that has a weighted door. There are many different squirrel proofing or squirrel deterrent feeders out there. I found this one to be the best. What happens is when the squirrel jumps onto the feeder itself, it closes the ports, not allowing the squirrel access to the feeder itself. So this is probably one of the best ways that you can keep squirrels from eating all of your bird food. So the reason the weighted door works is because birds are extremely light. Even the big birds, they're really just fluffy, they're all feathers. So when the birds are landing, it will not close that port. Now, things you need to think about are also placement. Squirrels can jump about 12 feet. So you want to situate your feeder 12 feet from any garage, from any tree, from any shrub, or any other launch point that a squirrel could climb up and jump onto. So here's another cylinder feeder right here. This one is designed for thistle seed, which we will get into later. This one is more for like the finches. If you want to attract gold and purple finches, this is really the one that you're looking for. The holes are way too small in this mesh screen right here for the squirrels to get into, but it's perfect for those small beaks and that small seed to provide for those finches. So if you are looking to just attract finches, or if you're trying to get a little more specific with the species you attract, using thistle seed and a thistle feeder is the way you want to go, and this one is relatively squirrel proof. All right, platform feeders are another feeder which are great for all of the ground feeding birds like robins. This is a very small version of a platform feeder. Platform feeders are wide open to squirrels, so it is kind of the risk you take when you use a platform feeder. But when you are trying to feed those ground feeding birds like the robins, you certainly would like to have one of these out there because they are more likely to come to this than your bird feeder. Another feeder that can also somewhat serve as a platform feeder and is probably the most squirrel proof of all of them is the window feeder. Window feeder is great. It's right outside your window, so you don't have to go outside necessarily to refill it. So that's a huge bonus. It's hanging off your window and squirrels don't usually climb the house. So like I said, this is probably the most squirrel proof feeder that you can find, and it gives you the best access to viewing the birds. Now you're going to have to sit very still because once they see you moving around in the house, they're going to fly away. But if you're able to sit there or from a distance watch these birds come to your window feeder, this is definitely the best one to get an up close and personal view. Now if you want to get creative and tricky with things, you could actually go get yourself a Ring cam or one of those video doorbell cams with the motion sensor and put that alongside your window feeder. And then anytime these birds come up, it's going to sense them, and you will be able to capture some video that you can share on Instagram and Facebook with your friends. Window feeders are really easy. Most of them come with suction cups on the back. So you are just going to collapse your window inside, wet the suction cup, stick it on there, then just open the window, fill the feeder, close it, and enjoy. The final feeder that we're going to introduce is the suet feeder. The suet feeder is very unique and it is a feeder unto itself. Suet is essentially beef fat that is formed into a cake. Now the commercial varieties are filled with seeds, fruits, and nuts. These are great for our overwintering birds because they have fat and they have protein. So they're providing a whole lot of energy for the birds to survive the cold and to make it through the winter months. It gives them all the energy that they need. But suet feeders, as you can see, have these wide holes. They are designed for those cakes. And you're going to have to change those cakes out every few weeks. And you never want to use suet feeders during a warm winter, or certainly not during the warmer months of the season, because the beef fat will go rancid real fast. All right, so now let's discuss seed. The most common and the most desired by almost every species of bird is the sunflower seed. Now, the black and white striped sunflower seed is the most common and usually is the cheapest, but the reality is the birds don't like that the best. They really like the black seed. So you want to find the black sunflower seed, and that is the one that is desired by most birds. Now, shelled seed is not necessarily accessible to the smaller billed birds. If you want to make it accessible to all species, you want to get the deshelled version of this seed. As I said, the small beaked birds can't necessarily manage the shell on the seed and break it down. However, the other species that absolutely loves sunflower seeds are the squirrels. So no, by getting sunflower seeds, you are definitely tempting those unwanted friends to your feeder. So the larger shell seeds like this, the sunflower seed, is great for that weighted door feeder and any cylinder feeder. It will fit right in there and all the birds can just access it from there. The next seed for that other cylinder feeder is the thistle seed or any of these smaller seeds. Now, if you remember, the small seed feeder, which has the fine mesh screen, is good for thistle seeds and other small seeds. As you can see, this seed is extremely fine, which is why you need that fine mesh. So if you want to just have those purple and gold finches outside your window, this is the seed that you are looking for, and that fine mesh feeder is certainly the one that you want. Moving into mostly the larger birds, the fruit and nut mixes are absolutely great. They're great for cardinals, grosbeaks, and chickadees can also access them. Fruit and nut are high fat, high sugar, and are great for providing energy for our overwintering birds. Next to the suet, it is probably the most high energy food that you can be putting in there, and provides a number of different nutrients. As I said, because you have the fruits, which is high sugar, you have the nuts, which is high fat, which is exactly what they need to make it through those cold winters. The next seed we're going to go over is the mixed seed. Mixed seed's kind of tricky because most of the mixed seeds that are on the market usually contain the black and white sunflower seed, and you think to yourself, oh, with all this mixed seed, I'm going to have all the species. Now, birds are kind of like little kids, and think of it kind of like trail mix. When you have a general, mostly purchased at the big box stores, mixed seed, the birds are just going to go through and pick out all their favorite stuff. They'll pick out all the peanuts. They'll pick out all the raisins. They'll pick out all their favorite things just like we do, just like little kids do. Keep in mind, when you're choosing a mixed seed, you want a professionally made, specialist made mixed seed. That way you won't have all that waste. What's the point of buying this big giant bag if most of it's just going to wind up on the ground or get left behind in the feeder? Okay, going to that final one, we have suet, which is a cake of fat, seed, fruits, and nuts, which goes right here in this feeder, a special suet feeder. Like I said, this is one of my favorites, probably because it makes me think of my grandmother and making suet with her. Now that it's all pre-made, it's a lot easier, it's a lot less messy, and it's a little less gross. However, as I mentioned, this is high fat, high protein, and really great for all different types of birds. One of the birds that you will certainly see if you have a suet feeder are woodpeckers. Woodpeckers absolutely love the suet, and if you can ever get the chance to see a pileated woodpecker up close feeding at your suet feeder, that's really cool. So if you want to attract the woodpecker, definitely grab yourself a suet feeder. All right, so now something that we don't usually think about is maintaining your feeders. Throughout the winter, all we think about is filling our feeders, filling our feeders. Your feeder is a buffet. So think about going to a restaurant that never cleaned its buffet. It basically becomes a petri dish for disease. So you are going to have to think about every few weeks cleaning your feeder before you refill it. some of those birds might be sick, and when they come to that feeder, they're going to pass those germs and viruses along, which could get massive amounts of the population sick. So then you'd be doing injustice to everybody that you are trying to feed. So every few feedings or every few fillings, you are certainly going to want to take your feeder down, clean it with a mild soap, dry it out, make sure that it's dry, and then fill it again and put it back out. If you never cleaned the buffet, it would certainly be gross. You don't need the sneeze guard, but you do need to keep it clean. So when to feed? Well, we talked about this in the last video, and we're going to recap now. So when it comes to timing, bird feeders and bird seed are best for the winter months, because that is when the seed and the nutrition in the environment is at its minimum. During the season, as we mentioned in the last video, there is plenty out there, and in the spring those birds want caterpillars, they want protein. In the winter is when they want their fat. So you want to be feeding the birds in the late fall, winter, and into maybe early spring. But once it starts to warm up, you should take your feeder down, clean it, and wait for the next season. So by eating the caterpillars and other insects in our garden, remember, they are minimizing what we call pests. All of the unwanted guests that might be nibbling on our plants that we don't want, that is nature's pest control. So we want to make sure that we are not getting them full on seeds and nuts and allowing them to eat the pests that are visiting our garden. And finally, one of the reasons you want to take your feeder down in the spring is bears. Because the bears are waking up extremely hungry, and they are going to find your bird feeder, as you've probably seen on social media, and certainly devastated. So now let's just zoom out to our whole environment for maximum birding experience. When you think about the life cycle of the animal and creating an environment or a habitat for those birds, you will have the maximum amount of birds and you will maximize your birding experience. So you want to have nesting sites, you want to have host plants that are going to host those caterpillars so the birds can find plenty of caterpillars in the spring. And then as the summer goes through and fall comes along, then we want to get into our seed and our feeders to make sure that we are attracting and feeding our friends year round. Thank you for watching. Remember, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel or just go to our YouTube channel, check out part 1. If you are a bird enthusiast or a garden enthusiast, there is plenty of content on there for you to see. Check out our newsletter for also more information and happenings that are going on. Stay tuned because we got a lot more coming.